All right, everybody, we're going to work on a little bit of the Explorer today, if I can kind of get this zoomed in. It's hard for me to tell if you guys can see this or not. So this is a real quick unit on like European exploration. We are now into the Mercantilism unit, and we got to bring this whole thing together. So you take a look at this map here, and the first question, if we had time to do this in class, was what do you see? And as you're looking at this map, you can clearly tell that it is widely distorted. It's not even accurate. Like this, you know, if you can see like France and Spain, Portugal, and Italy, that's pretty good. The Middle East is okay, but Africa? All right, maybe like the shoulder socket. And down here is like India and South Asia, Russia and China. Where in the heck is Australia? And what else that you're going to notice is missing is the Americas. Where are they? So this is a European map of the known world right as we get into this unit. And by the late early 1500s, just as the Islamic gunpowder empires, the Ottomans, the Safavids, the Mughals we talked about, reached their height, Europeans began reaching out into the oceans, reaching out into the known world. And like the ancient phone-home Phoenicians, the first long-distance sailors, it's the Portuguese over here who kind of kickstart this process. They began to test the waters beyond Europe. And the Portuguese are going to help develop a new ship, you'll see in a second, known as a caravel. All right? And it'll become known as the Spanish caravel. It combined many of the best elements of sailing technology at the same time. First thing they do is they get the old stern post rudder off a Chinese junk. So they're not steering with their oars anymore. They have a rudder off the back of the ship to help steer them. And then they get the triangular shaped lateen sail. That can be like, think of an old Asian fan that can be folded up to catch just a little bit of wind, or folded out or closed down to stabilize the ship in a little bit of wind. I'll give you a better demonstration of them in school tomorrow. And by having the three different sails, even if they're sailing into the wind, they can shift the wind around to come in like a fish hook and propel them forward. So they take the triangular sail off of Islamic merchant vessels. They looked at the Viking shipbuilding technology, the Viking ship with a high, steep bow like you see here, 2 or 3 masts, and a narrow deck. They combine all of that on the caravel. This gives them the ability to handle the ship in all wind and even ocean currents. They could actually sail when there was little to no wind, and sometimes even into the wind. And who comes up with this is the Portuguese. The Portuguese figure out that the only way to make a lot of money of trade is along the Silk Road. That had been the only way to take advantage of trading, unless you were on the Indian Ocean, the Chinese and Islamic scholars. However, when the Mongol Empire broke up, and we have the 3 different gunpowder empires, the Safavids, the Mughals, and the Ottomans, remember under Pax Mongolica, it was safe to travel the length of the Silk Road. Genghis Khan gave you those early, like the world's first passports. It was safe to travel. Now you got Shiite, you got Sunni. It's not as stable as it once was. It's more dangerous and difficult. So the Portuguese, aided by shipbuilding technology, begin to incorporate science. And the scientific technology, the first thing that they're going to come up with, we did put it on here, is the old Chinese magnetic compass. All right? Let it point us in the direction where north is. So we kind of always know where north is. That is going to help guide us. A needle floating on Mercury, pointing to magnetic north. Now this is great, but it's not super accurate when going long distances. So in the 1400s, Portuguese sailors began to use the astrolabe, this little device right here, and allowed people to measure the angle of the sun at a fixed point on their horizon. They could measure the angle of the sun and certain stars, like the North Star, like Venus, in relation to their distance. And so people could help keep an accurate fixed point on their bearings and keep them going. They could measure how much distance they travel. And because the Portuguese are going to use the astrolabe, they're going to come up with what's called Mercator Projection. This takes place in 1569. It's like a modern day map where you've got longitude and latitude lines making squares or grids across the globe. What GPS satellites use. North, south, and east, west lines, making them into small squares to aid navigation. And last but not least, we're going to have a really good device up until GPS, the sextant, which when combined with the astrolabe and Mercator projection, helped measure the sun's altitude at a certain point every day. And by 1731, by comparing the altitude of the sun with the ship's current latitude and longitude, you could put an exact location of where your ship was. So you knew exactly where you were on the Mercator projection, how close you were to getting to your destination. So combining these new technologies allows map makers or cartographers to map the known world with greater accuracy. With these maps, the Portuguese were able to travel farther, faster, and safer than anyone thought possible. And the guy, here's the old Latin sail we're going to talk about. Compass, astrolabe, we got all that. Now, why do people want to explore? Well, the big three reasons are gold, God, and glory, the three G's, all right? We want to get a faster way to get to Asia to cut out the middleman. All right? It's like going to Sam's Club or Costco. You go to get 5-gallon buckets of peanut butter and mayonnaise so you don't have to go to a Harris Teeter, to a Food Line, to a Walmart, to a Target. You cut that middleman out and you go right to the source. A lot of money, a lot of gold can be made there. Plus, you can be famous. You can be the first one to do it. You can be the Magellan, or the Columbus, or the John Glenn, or the Neil Armstrong, or the Meriwether and Lewis and Clark. All right? You can get the glory to do this. And we're going to do it to spread Christianity. We're going to bring religion to some of these poor people. And you know what? I just want to see what's out there. I'm just curious. I want to Indiana Jones this thing and find out what is happening. And so it's the Portuguese that are going to start doing this. And the trip is dangerous. It's fraught with danger, but if you make one successful run, you can be extremely wealthy. And here it is where we go back to the breakup of the Mongol empires that makes it more difficult. So this guy, Prince Henry of Portugal, sometimes known as Prince Henry the Navigator, in 1415 is going to kick off a new era in exploration. Now, he wanted to meet a very wealthy African Christian king named Prester John. Him and Prester John were going to work to help combat the spread of Islam. But Prince Henry also wants to tap in and map the African gold trade. So to help the success of this venture, Prince Henry hires a team of scientists and shipbuilders and map makers and you name it, and he combines them with brave sea captains, encouraging them to sail a little farther and a little farther out into the ocean. And eventually, you'll see in a second, they begin these leapfrogging voyages down the African coast. I'm going to take food and water for 60 days. When I hit day 30, I'm going to record where I'm at. I'm going to turn around. And the next buddy will take food and provisions for 90 days. He'll go a little bit farther, 45 days, he'll head back, and then 120, and then 150, and so on and so forth, until we get down the coast. Now, unfortunately, Prince Henry will die in 1460, just a little bit before people are able to sail around the dangerous tip of Africa, now known as the Cape of Good Hope. They will eventually make it. And it's known as the Cape of Good Hope for two reasons. Number one, hopefully you make it successfully around Africa. You make it around the bottom of what is today South Africa. Number two, you hoped you made it to Asia. If we get around Africa, well, isn't Asia right there? Won't India be right there? Oh, wait a minute. There is the Indian Ocean that we're not quite aware of at this point. So, first guy that's going to start it, it's going to be this guy, Bartholomew Diaz. He's going to make it around the Cape of Good Hope, and that's about it before he turns around and he heads back. Now, what is really going to help out Portugal is in 1497, this guy, Vasco da Gama, makes it around the Cape of Good Hope, and he makes it all the way over to India. Here's those little leapfrogging tactics that I told you guys about. And on this dangerous journey, Vasco loses many ships. He also lost a lot of his sailors to thirst and to hunger and what we now know as scurvy, or vitamin D or C deficiency, which we had to bring citrus fruits on the ships. But even with the loss of men and the ships, his fleet makes it to India, and when they get back, they make such enormous sums of money that instead of resting on his literal billions of dollars that he had for his day and age and living a life of luxury, Vasco buys a new fleet of ships, outfits them, and sails right back. And what he does is he leaves behind willing Portuguese sailors to build little warehouses, to buy goods, spices and food and silk cheaply at the source. They would store them up until Vasco's ships came back and loaded them up. By 1502, Portugal had become so wealthy that other European nations began to follow suit. They began to build foreign outposts to support this international trade as everybody is beginning to get really, really rich. But when someone has a good idea, first thing we want to do is copy it. So here comes Spanish competition. Very competitive, it's kind of like the European soccer league is today, or whatever that thing is, West Ham versus Manchester United or whatever. The rulers of Spain were jealous of and did not want to lose ground to their Portuguese neighbors when it comes to this long-distance trade. So the Spanish are going to hire their own brave sea captains, and they come along Mr. Christopher Columbus, who has a different and daring plan to find riches. Now, instead of going around Africa, he fails if we just break left. If we go west and sail across the Atlantic, while India's right there, it's a direct route. We don't have to go all the way down and around. We'll just shoot straight across. Everyone thought he was nuts, but he makes it. And I know in the modern day, everyone likes to vilify Columbus. Yes, did he kill hundreds of natives? Yes, but if you go down there today, bizarrely or not, they got like a temple and a shrine and a museum to the guy, and they like him. Love him or hate him, what matters is he makes it. And on August 3rd, 1492, Columbus set sail with the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria. And I'll give the guy credit just for this. If you ever go up and see the replicas like at the Norfolk Naval Museum, one of those things would probably almost fit in my classroom. They're tiny. It's like going across the Atlantic in a bathtub and hoping that you make it. Well, after a rough voyage, almost 2 months long. And Columbus saying, hey guys, you could throw me overboard, you could kill me, but I'm the only one who knows how to use the old sextant and the astrolabe, so you got to kind of keep me around. His fleet will find land on October 12, 1492. In what is today the Caribbean, all the Sandals and Beaches resort islands. He was still looking for China and India, and he sails around the Caribbean. And he thought he had reached the Pacific Islands of the East Indies. So he starts calling the people Indians. Unfortunately, my boy, as we all know, was not correct. But he returns back to Spain, a conquering hero. He will make the same trip 3 more times for a total of 4. And he is convinced every single time that he is in Asia. Now, we all know he wasn't, and he was lost. And yes, probably Leif Erikson and some Vikings made it up to here. Watch my favorite show, Curse of Oak Island. But Columbus made it over and back and recorded it. So he gets credit for so-called discovering the New World. Shortly after his death in 1506, other Europeans realized that this was not Asia, that it was a whole new world, as Aladdin says to Jasmine, and lines of influence start getting drawn up. There was such a dispute between Spain and Portugal, and Spain and England and Portugal, that the Pope has to get involved and make them sign a treaty so there is not a war between Spain and Portugal, and then England throws its hat in later. So, from England comes John Cabot, and while everyone else is trying to go India this way, he believes he's going to sail and find an all-water route through the Northwest Passage up into what is today like New York Harbor, St. Lawrence Seaway. Found out it was really cold up there and never quite made it. We get Amerigo Vespucci, another guy that comes out of Portugal, and this is Columbus's route, if you can make out this little red triangle. And he does that one. Then Amerigo goes farther south and makes it all the way down to Tierra del Fuego. He is the one that will declare it a new land, so North and South America are named for Amerigo Vespucci here. So by the time they're done, if you remember that first map I showed you, Africa is a lot more accurate. India is still, taking shape. Still, Asia down here is like a big blob. China, Vietnam, and Australia. And the Americas are kind of there, but we're real thin here. Like this is like North America, and I don't know what that is. And this is South America. It's not great, but it's getting better. And then we get this guy, Spanish sailor Ferdinand Magellan. He undertakes what is arguably one of the most fantastic, epic, and dangerous voyages of all time. Magellan was influenced by Vasco da Gama and Christopher Columbus. We're going to find an all-water route to the New World we know as the Americas and Asia. And so Magellan begins to interview different crews, and he's asking them questions. How brave are you? Do you have any family? What is your experience? And he tells them that they're going to go on a voyage of at least 2 years. Maybe a little longer, but at least 2 years. Where are we heading? Well, I really can't tell you that. It's top secret. He never tells anybody his overall plan. So he's able to sign up this very large, multicultural crew for his voyage. And he outfits 5 ships, and they leave on September 20th, 1519. And on the way across the Atlantic, Magellan is fraught with storms and his mast break and a few mutinies. And they finally make it to the coast of South America, sing "Sea Boys, I Told You." And they go inside to get a new tree to fix their mast, and they see these exotic plants and animals. And after exploring the coast of South America, he makes it around what we call the Straits of Magellan today, the dangerous waters where you got the Atlantic Ocean current mixing with the Pacific Ocean current, sandwiched between Antarctica and South America in that freezing cold, nasty, stormy water, but he makes it. Magellan and his crew are head able into the vast Pacific and the unknown. Unfortunately, the guys didn't know how big the Pacific Ocean was, and they head up the coast and they look at Chile, and then they make that left turn, and probably about the worst area possible was because where they turned left in the Philippine Islands, there was nothing. Not even like Fiji or Vanuatu or the islands where they hold the Survivor game show on. There was just the vastness of absolutely nothing. After 4 months of sailing with little food and water, the starving sailors wind up in the Philippines. And they're like, woo, all right. And initially Magellan is able to make good headway into the Philippines. He's able to spread some Christianity, and his guys get food and water and fruit. And then the natives say, hey, we helped you like bumbling bozos out of the water. Can you help us with your superior weapons technology take out a neighboring tribe? Magellan's like, yeah, great, easy. And as the soldiers and the local native Filipinos get into combat with a neighboring village in 1521, Magellan is wounded and killed during the fighting. And so even with their leader gone, Magellan's intrepid fleet continues onward. They know where China and the Indian Ocean is, and on September 8th, 1522, after being gone for a little over 3 years, Magellan's crew makes it back. They are the first to circumnavigate the entire globe. Out of an initial crew of 250, 18 men make it back. And so the interconnectedness of Africa, Europe, and Asia, migrating outward, expanding and incorporating the Americas into the world economy, brings us into our next unit, mercantilism, the transatlantic trade, the Columbian exchange. And this is going to have an impact on the entire world, where Europe will get fresh raw materials and gold and silver that will propel it to power at the cost of Native Americans and natives in Africa. So, as Europe will control more money and resources than ever before. So after Magellan is done, this is where we start to get a look at the modern known world and all the different products that are being traded from Southeast Asia to India to China to Africa and the New World. But there's a new player, an unlikely sea power here, and that is the Netherlands. While Portugal is dominant at the beginning because of their large head start in exploration, it's the small country in the North Sea of the Netherlands, Amsterdam and tulips and windmills and all that pretty stuff, that will rise and challenge the dominance of the Portuguese. The Netherlands were connected in part of the Spanish Habsburg Empire. The King of Spain actually was king of the Netherlands as well. And in 1599, a Dutch fleet will return to the Netherlands after a long epic voyage to Asia. When the fleet returned to port, all of the investors that invested made such great dividends on, such return on their investment, just incredible sums of money. Seeing that the amount of money that could be made, everyone in the Netherlands wanted in the best get-rich-quick scheme ever. You don't even need to go on Shark Tank for this. You're going to be rich. And so some smart guys will begin to form what they call the Dutch East India Company, the DEIC, in 1602. And it will fight Portugal to rival the sea power, a quest to become the most powerful European country in the world. And so, like Spain and Portugal, the Dutch will trade with China. And they're able to monopolize trade in Southeast Asia because the Dutch weren't very intrusive. They were able to form alliances with local populations. Some of the Dutch assimilated into the native culture. They didn't attempt to convert them or force Dutch religion or Dutch lifestyle on them. They interacted very well. The Spanish and the Portuguese were bent on conversion. Well, there was no big push for this. Some of the Dutch married into the native populations. They only wanted access to trade goods, so they become extremely wealthy. And the Dutch are going to equip a dual-purpose fleet. Part of it has a cargo hold for trade, but it also has cannons and weapons to defend itself against its European rivals. And so the Dutch will set up colonial outposts like the one Vasco da Gama did down in India, and not wanting to draw attention to themselves, they stayed away from the mighty Spanish Armada and some of the Portuguese trading fleets, and they start a little settlement down in the south of Africa known as the Cape Colony that will eventually become Cape Town. It was meant to stay out of the way and to resupply their ships on the way to India, but we know how all that turned out. So when we're all said and done, this is what's going to happen. All the green will belong to Spain. This orange, like Brazil, will be Portugal. Kind of the blue purplish is French. Red will belong to England. Brown up here is Russia. And the tiny little purple, it's hard to see, will be the Dutch in the Caribbean and in South America. That is what North America will look like at the end of the age of exploration. It will form what we know as the triangle trade. Finished products, textiles, rum, and manufactured goods will go to Africa. Well, they will be traded for slaves who will go to the Americas North, South, and the Caribbean islands to do the labor for heavy cash crops, sugar, tobacco, cotton, in Europe. Was all the Native Americans will be dead, slaves will be taken from Africa to replace the Native Americans to do the labor in what we know as the Columbian Exchange. From the Americas to Europe, Africa, and Asia, beans, potatoes, tomatoes, corn, peanuts, tobacco, and peppers. Coming over to the Americas will be onions, turnips, peaches, wheat, rice, barley, cows, sheep, pigs, and horses. But along with that comes smallpox, influenza, typhus, the whooping cough, the common flu, which devastates large populations. There's the age of exploration, guys. I hope you enjoyed it, and that's that. Ooh, 28 minutes.